Hello everybody and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar here at Purdue University. It is my great pleasure to introduce today David Carroll from MITRE, and he's going to give us his perspective on identity management.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of identity management, talk about some models and possibly some use cases that I've seen. I've worked a considerable amount of the last 10 years of my career in identity and access management for both corporations and for federal government agencies, and I like to say I've either seen it, built it, or broke it at some point. So hopefully you'll find this interesting, and it's a very unstructured talk. At any time, if you have a question, just give me a hand and we'll talk about it, any issues that you find intriguing. So the overview, we're going to talk about what is IDM, the evolution of IDM, how it's come to the state it has, a little bit more about the history, some common models, some examples from the field that I've actually worked on, and I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about some lessons learned, some things that when you do find yourself out there in the industry or working in this field or in this part of the security field that you should pay attention to. So I try to define identity management. There's a lot of models out there. Some folks think that identity management is simply provisioning. Some think it's directory services. Some think it's a little bit of both. Over the last few years, I've actually tried to define a model that covers user provisioning, access management, and federation. Federation being the newest entry. And at times I've liked to try to put privacy management into that, but that's actually moving into a different area now, and so I've kind of kept that out. It's identity management it can be procedures, it can be technology, it can be standards, it can be any number of things that manage the digital identity life cycle. And what I mean by that is it can automate the user experience, it can manage the work entry and exit, so what you do when you get on site, what you do when you leave the site. It provides, now in the federation world, it provides for access and authorization across the enterprise as well as outside the enterprise. And it can also cover some roles and some rules for data access. We're going to talk about each of these models just a little bit. Come up with a structure model that kind of relates to the other security technologies. You'll see here the security controls going up over the in the orange side of your screen there. It kind of spans all the layers. But the important things for this discussion are the IDM technologies, which you have the user provisioning and identity, which covers LAN, WAN, apps, external partners, and then impacts federation. In there, as you reach to the outside, you've got your security perimeter, but under that user provisioning and identity management, you have a user account for everything you do. No matter if it's logging on, using anything from using your speed pass in the morning, getting on your bank account. I at one time tried to count how many identities I had on the internet, and I think I came up with about 29 before I decided that was too depressing. So I went back and took a look at it again, and I think I'm down to about 10 now, so I'm getting better. Access management covers all these, and it relates to the business data and also the network system. So this is a very simple way of looking at how these technologies fit in, and I like to try to present them in the middle of these layers, because a lot of the companies and a lot of the ideology and the thought out there today in the industry is that this is a type of security middleware, that anything classified as identity management, access management, provisioning is really going to become part of a middleware. So for example, if you're talking about WebSphere, they've actually started taking out the authentication technologies out of the WebSphere platform and putting it into the Tivoli side of things, which is an identity management middleware tier. Identity management started out, and I've researched this a bit, and most of the time when I see IDM evolving, I see it coming out of a movement for unified directory services. About 10 years ago, there was a big movement to come out of disparate directories that we're going to talk about in a minute and move to a more centralized model. So directory services almost always starts this process, and I've seen it in industry. Basically, my identity management started in about 1997 with a project that was basically to take user information and provide a fee-for-service model for a company. So they need to know how to identify people, what their attributes are, in order to make sure that they are gaining access to network services and that their cost centers are paying for them. So basically they asked, what do we need to do that? And the answer was a directory service. So that starts the ball rolling. Pretty soon you have unified directory and identity, and then you work your way into access management, and then finally the evolution reaches federation, which is moving outside your borders. So you can read through these. Large enterprises, inadequate methods, almost always. I don't know how many identities you have here on the Purdue campus, but I guarantee you probably have more than one, and it's probably used for very different things. And there are different degrees of management of those identities. Some of them are very self-service oriented, where you can go in and change your password. You can put passphrase, what's your favorite color, what's your dog's name, that type of thing. And then you have the kind that require a lot of work. You got to call up a help desk. You've got to issue a ticket. The motivation for IDM in most cases is that large organizations can't handle that at scale. So they look to technology to try to reduce the impact of that. Some of the earlier studies from Burton Group and Gartner cited sometimes, I think one of the numbers was at one company was up to $400 per month per user in lost labor every time they lost a password, and they had 14 of them. So it was a considerable amount of investment in folks losing time. So it's a big factor for companies. If you have someone who's working a customer service center, or if you have someone who's working a reservation center or something like that, and they get locked out and they're unable to service the client for X amount of hours, they're basically unable to do their job. The evolution also of land-based applications into web services really amplified this evolution. There were a lot of folks wandering around talking about why they should centralize their directories, but then it became evident, and the best example I've seen of this in recent years is you have Active Directory from Microsoft, which is a very robust operating system, a network operating system, so what I would classify as a special use directory. It worked very well for LAN access and even to get you into your email and everything else, but the problem is when you get to a large-scale web application that requires users who have no access to printers or file shares or things like that, the model kind of breaks, and that's a lot of overhead with the replication that directory service does and the network hooks that it has to deploy that in lieu of deploying a very simple, straightforward user database or a directory or a standard LDAP directory or something like that. So even Microsoft in recent years has come out with a new product that basically is a standalone directory because they saw the need to separate those two, and that really was born out of web services. The ability to provide large customer bases, instant access to information across tiers and across, from the presentation tier back to the data tier. There are standards. Some of you probably heard of Security Assertion Markup Language or the WS Security Standards. They're out there. They are the basis for supporting large-scale federation. And a few years ago, I was actually out at an IBM research center, and they were talking about the implications of large-scale federation to grid computing and how the basis for doing effective grid had to be trust across these environments. And I think that's a highly relevant and interesting case for why identity management is evolving. We all have to trust each other, and we have to trust each other across boundaries that were not thought of before. The product lines in this area are narrowing. There's the innovation curve, and it started out. I think I went to a couple of conferences back in the late 90s and the 2000, 2001 conferences. There were hundreds of these technologies, and now they're being bought up. And you'll see folks like Obelix being bought. I believe they're bought by Oracle, and you'll see Microsoft buying several IDM technologies, and they're starting to consolidate into the big players in the market.